So thanks for joining us today, everyone. This is an event put on by CenterState CEO and SyracuseFirst, and we're doing it all about podcasting. We originally had this event planned for, I think it was late March or early April before everything, kind of happened. So we have now made this a virtual event. So thanks for joining us. And we have some awesome experts on the line to help us go through this. But basically today, we're going to be talking about the best practices, production details, marketing needs, and podcasting. Kind of everything in one. So without further ado, I will introduce our panelists. For the record, my name is Kara Jones. I am the Marketing and Communications Manager at the Tech Garden, which is a program of CenterState CEO and their innovation and entrepreneurship portfolio. And we actually just released a podcast at the Tech Garden where we interview entrepreneurs and hear their startup stories in Central New York. So you'll hear a little bit more about that today too. So let's meet our panelists. We're going to start off with Susie.
Hi everyone, I'm Susie Ippolito from Susie Ippolito Brands, and I'm a brand strategist, and I work with brands to help them develop into successful and sustainable businesses. I'll be talking today a little bit about your strategy in developing your podcast, your basics, what you need to get into place before you can start as far as your brand and your business, and some marketing tips and how you can launch your podcast successfully. This is exciting. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Susie. Next, we have Adam.
Hi, everyone. I'm Adam Raymonda. I am a freelance podcast producer, composer, and sound designer. I work with a variety of different clients, some here locally. I work closely with Susie, and I also work with clients all over the country. So I have some clients in Chicago who we're currently doing some work for NPR, and I've worked with a company called Rogue Dialogue Productions right here in Syracuse to produce a fiction podcast called Windfall.
Cool, thanks Adam. And last we have Josh.
Hi everybody, I do broadcasting here in Central New York, Syracuse and Utica and beyond. I've been podcasting for 10 years. I have been on the radio for 11 or 12 here in CNY. And am rather new to the video streaming world when it comes to Twitch and YouTube and streaming. I've only been doing that for about a year, but I've been doing all of that for a very long time, and hopefully I can help answer any questions you have.
Cool, thanks Josh. All right, so I'm just gonna briefly cover our agenda. We have about an hour today. So we're gonna talk about why podcasts, kind of go over the creation concept, how to record, how to edit, how to promote, talk about some local podcasts, and then we're going to open it up to our panelists in a Q&A. I would ask that you hold your questions until the end and use the chat feature. So with that being said, if you do have a question, second slide in, write it down because we don't want you to forget it. And if it's a question directed at someone, either Susie, Josh, or Adam, maybe just type in their name and then the question at the end. Okay, cool. So we'll get started. So why podcasts? Podcasts are very popular now. 44% of Americans have at least listened to them. They're a great way to get your brand noticed in a different way. They're nice because you can hear a story, and the lack of visuals require your imagination and helps you feel a part of the conversation. I don't know about you guys, but I like to listen to podcasts while I'm going for long drives or cooking, so that's also pretty nice. And they allow business owners to become influencers and really hone in on the niche market that they're talking about. And they're free and portable. So the type of media isn't going anywhere fast, and it continues to be a popular method to speak to different audiences about different niches and industry topics. So that's kind of why we're doing this. Podcasts are pretty popular, especially in a time when we're all virtual now. So, if your business has considered maybe doing a podcast, or you love listening to podcasts, it might be the time to put it into your business plan and start doing it. So we're going to start off with, okay, your business is interested in doing a podcast. So how do you start, right? That's always the biggest hurdle and challenge. So we're going to start with Susie, and we're going to talk about kind of the creation and concept of your podcast first. So we're going to have Susie kind of cover that right now.
Hi, thanks. So it's incredibly important to structure your strategy going into this, because for a couple of reasons. You are diving into a crowded pool, and it's going to become, I think, a little bit more crowded in this moment as we're all home and thinking how to create more value for our audiences and how to connect new and different ways to connect with them. So it's important to have strategy going in so that you can do that most effectively. The other reason is because this is not inexpensive to do. Depending on the level of quality that you're looking to put out there, it can be quite an investment. So you want to really know what you're doing going in. So the first important thing, and I think, Kara, you can switch to the next slide, please. Thank you. So you want to focus in on picking a genre. So this is a pretty comprehensive list of possible genres, and it doesn't mean that one isn't going to touch on the other. So for example, if you're a news and politics genre, you might still touch on pop culture, but you're going to speak about it differently than a pop culture podcast. But it's good to stick to one and build your concrete platform from that one genre, so you know what you're focused on and your audience knows what to rely on you for. Then you should set an intention, and again, pick one or two of these. And it doesn't mean that you can't have a sense of humor, but a sense of humor, your primary mode of communication. Is that really, are you looking to educate or motivate or inspire through sense of humor? That's one lens that you look at your content through. If you're looking to educate, motivate, and inspire from a religious standpoint, that's an entirely other lens that you're looking at your content through. So those are some good ways that you can go about beginning to strategize where your content will go. I think there's one more slide. Thank you. So we decided to develop a little bit of an outline tool for you to be able to use so that, and you'll be able to download this, I think. Is that right, Kara? You'll be able to download it. It'll be emailed to you at some point. And but basically you want to establish the goals of your episode. You want to really know very well going in that main thread that you want to pull through the conversation so that people can follow it and that your main point is made. You've delivered what you wanted to deliver to your audience and they received it well. Weave in any associated brand or business goals, anything that you're looking to establish your brand as an authority on. This is a great place to do that in podcasts, to broadcast your knowledge. And if you can tie it into business goals, that's just going to work out that much better for you. Again, because this is an expensive venture, this is very long-term ROI, and you want to be able to kind of satisfy some needs in the meantime. So even if it is brand awareness and establishing yourself as an authority, you're still going to get some value out of that. You want to focus on a main topic. You want to decide what problems you seek to solve with your content. This is an important one to make you stand out in the pool, that very crowded pool that you're in. Even once you've specified a genre, you still want to seek to solve very specific problems with the content that you're putting out. And you want to surprise and delight your audience. You want to give them a reason to come back and tune in again. So what's unique about your personality? What's unique about your take on the topic that you're addressing? These are really great places to start strategizing how you're going to even move into thinking about starting your podcast.
Great, thanks, Susie. And then I just want to open it up to Josh or Adam. If you guys have any tips or anything that you guys want to talk about, just starting the podcast.
I can add,
Okay.
I think that Susie highlighted a lot of great components there. And I think that answering a lot of those questions will help you, get to a point where once you sit down and start to record something, you'll have a much better idea of what you want that to sound like. A big thing that I would recommend doing at this point would be listening to other shows and kind of identifying some that you might think, oh, well, maybe we're kind of in the same genre or style, or the production style. Think about the personalities that you connect to through the shows that you listen to yourself, and see what are the things that you enjoy out of the production style or the way that they present their information, whether it's through an interview or, reported stories, or if it's a piece of fiction or whatever it might be. Associating yourself with some of that and kind of getting familiar with other content that you might want to be like would be very helpful.
Yeah, and I think that it comes down to something you'd want to listen to. Like if you're interested in history, do a podcast about history. If you're interested in local restaurants and food, that's where you should focus. And just because you hit record and you have your first recording, that doesn't need to be the one that gets released. You can really practice over and over again and go back and listen to that and say, wow, I really kind of stumbled over that, or I'm not sounding too confident with that. I mean, just practice it. And, when you're ready to finally release those episodes, you can do it. But for now, it's as easy as just you and your co-host sitting down and just trying it as many times as you can. You're not paying for reel-to-reel tape. You're just going to hit record, and you can do it as much as you want until you're confident.
Definitely. Yeah. Thanks, guys. So then I just pulled this from the web. Obviously, with a podcast, when you start one, you got to pick a title. So there's creative titles, there's descriptive titles, there's titles with your name. So I just put some of these up that I listen to. And a tip that I have on here is if you have a handful of potential podcast names picked out, you can say to someone, I'm doing a podcast on blank, and what do you think it'll be about? You don't have a ton of space on your graphic to really write everything your podcast is about. That's what the description's for. But typically when people are scrolling through their phone and their app looking for podcasts, that is the name, and the graphic is something that catches their eye. I put a site on here, businessnamegenerator.com/podcast name generator, just to put in some keywords, some things that your podcast might be about, and that'll kind of show you what different titles are available. Alrighty, and then, once you get that all figured out, it's time to actually record and start developing your podcast. So we're gonna have Adam talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I'm catering some of this a little bit towards this particular point in time, but these questions are going to be applicable at any point, regardless of if we were all at stay-at-home orders right now. Some big questions that you want to answer for yourself first are, how am I going to record it? And this is going to depend on what the style of your podcast is. If you are doing a conversational podcast where, let's say, you are sitting down with someone else, normally you would need to have, at least 2 microphones to be able to record yourself doing that. And some things that you need to consider is just what kind of equipment will you need to be able to capture that. There are a bunch of different pieces here, but the main parts of the puzzle are a microphone for yourself. There's a couple of different ways that you can record, whether it's something that is like a traditional standard microphone that I have in front of my face right now, or there are microphones that can plug in through USB directly into your computer, so that you don't have to worry too much about the setup. There's just an easy way to plug it in and record it. If you do need a way to capture that audio, so a recorder or some kind of audio interface to be able to capture the information, to take the sound that you're speaking into the microphone and then turn it into a digital file. There's a variety of different options that are out there. And it really is going to depend on what you need. Some of them are going to allow you to record more than one microphone at a time. If you think that you are just going to do a chat show with just yourself and another person, maybe you only need to have the capability of 2. But if you do see that expanding out for additional people eventually, let's say your brand wants to have a roundtable discussion, maybe you do want to consider having something that's going to allow you to record multiple people at the same time. And then the last piece, you might see this referred around as a DAW, or digital audio workstation. It's a way for you to be able to edit and kind of keep the files that you are recording and then edit them down into your final product. And so specifically right now, let's say if I wanted to record a interview style show right now, I have a microphone and I have my computer and I have a digital audio workstation, the one that I use. There's a couple of different options out there for those that I meant to mention, which were like Reaper is a program that you can download for free to be able to edit, and that for a trial of up to 60 days. There are other things like Logic or Pro Tools. The one that I'm using primarily right now is Pro Tools, and if I'm here and I have a microphone, a recorder, and my digital audio workstation, but I want to record somebody else and have them in a discussion with me. Right now, we can't be together, so there's some other ways that we can capture things. They could record themselves. So let's say if you and a co-host both have your equipment, you could record separately and then bring your audio together to be edited at a later point in time. There's actually, if you are talking to somebody who reporters will use this a lot, or you could even use this instead of, if somebody didn't have a microphone, you could take any smartphone. Most of them have a voice memos app or a way to record your just audio. If people start recording and hold it up to their ear, the audio quality is surprisingly good in comparison to, let's say, even just a Zoom audio quality. If that's not an option and you do want to be able to record somebody at home, there are ways where you can take audio from Skype or Zoom and use programs like Audio Hijack, and what that'll do is record the audio that you have coming in from your guest and kind of take it in and put it into a file in your computer. And then there's also services that are out there right now that will allow you over a browser to record basically like a full podcast online with something like Squadcast or Zencaster. They do have the capability of recording the audio and separating that out into different tracks depending on who is on there, so that you can go through and edit it at a later point in time. So there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle, but the main thing is, how are you going to capture it with your microphone? How are you going to record it? And then where are you going to edit it?
Perfect. Thanks, Adam. Yeah, we use Zencaster at the Tech Garden, and it works great. It's free, but you can't see the person on the other end, so it makes it a little tricky. But you know, it works great. So I recommend that tool, definitely. So now we're going to open it up to Josh or Susie. If you guys have any recording or interviewing tips, please share them.
Yeah, I'm sure Adam will agree with me that 90% of people that you're going to talk to don't know how to use a microphone. From the radio world to podcasting, they're either too far away, they don't know how to use it. It's really inconvenient for them. A trick that I figured out, it's not pretty, but I built a kind of a mobile interview kit where I have like a little battery powered mixer that goes into a recorder, and I use lav mics, because once I put that on my guest's shirt, they can't get too far away or they can't screw it up. It's idiot proof. So if you're going to be doing an interview show, once we can get back, together and do that kind of stuff, if you don't want to lug around, the ideal situation is like Adam's saying, if you can have a whole workstation with mics or they can come to you. But if you're going to be doing a lot of mobile podcasting, you can get lavalier mics for $100, and they're good quality, and they're idiot proof. You plug it in and the person can move around and they can be animated and they're not going to get off that mic. So you'll have a good recording.
That's all really great information. One really important tip, I think, is to consult with a professional, because especially if this is not something that you're familiar with, any kind of recording or the devices and materials that you need, a 30-minute call with somebody who knows exactly what they're doing, who's a real pro at it, is a worthy investment going into this. And as far as recording and interviewing from a content strategy standpoint, you want to go in being as well prepared as possible. And like Josh said, this is a great medium to practice because you're just hitting delete and record over and over. It's easy on the ego, not as hard as writing and editing yourself. So you just have to get used to it. It's a great place to, it's a great thing to approach with beginner's eyes. Even if you've written something before, even if you're an accomplished writer, you're likely writing within a context that you've never written before. So if you just go into it like thinking that you don't really know anything about it, you'll probably get a much better result. Even Oprah had to relearn broadcasting when she started her podcast because it's a slightly different medium. So, and you connect with your audience in a different way. So that would be a great interview tip or getting prepared tip.
Thanks, Susie. Yeah, with that being said too, I recommend an outline as well. When you start to interview someone, it's nice to have like their bio up, some questions that you want to ask them just to kind of stay on track. Obviously, you know, it is supposed to be conversational, so it could get off track pretty quickly, but have an outline too that you have in front of you during an interview. And also, this might sound obvious too, but it's a good, you have to find a good place to record as well. Sometimes a small office, it has a lot of echoes, so actually being somewhere bigger, like at the Tech Garden in our theater, it's large, and at first you're like, oh, that sounds like it won't be best, but it actually is because of the echoes. So really make sure you pick a good spot to record as well. All right, so what's next? Let's see here. So the editing, all right. So editing freaks probably everyone out, but hopefully Adam will give us some tips on how to edit a podcast.
Yeah, so the editing process can seem overwhelming, and the option is out there to be able to utilize a professional. There are people out there like myself who do freelance editing who can take the content and then shrink it down into a piece of, you know, a piece that is going to make sense for your audience. But the main things that you want to do is kind of get an editing tool, right? I mentioned a few of them earlier. There are some out there that are relatively affordable, like Reaper, or Audacity is a completely free program, which is a great way to get sort of your feet wet on what to do. There's also so many resources out there as far as YouTube tutorials on how to do a crash course on a little bit of editing. The main goal of editing is to reduce maybe vocal disfluencies like ums or uhs or long pauses, right? Or take out anything that maybe somebody stated something and doesn't actually want to have that broadcast, or they want to restate themselves. There's ways that you can kind of cut out a piece of that audio and kind of bring it down so that the conversation or the content that your audience is getting is the sort of slimmest, most effective version of that. Now, there are other shows out there, like I think Joe Rogan is like one of the like highest, most downloaded shows out there right now. And his show is largely unedited, and that works for certain personalities, right? It's if you are going to have these 2, 3, 4 hour long conversations with people, some people want that because they just want to be involved in that. So I think part of this editing process is deciding, is kind of furthering some of that content piece that Susie brought up initially, is kind of solidifying the style that you want that to be put out there. There's some things that you do want to consider are an intro, whether that's something, it's a musical piece, or it may be something that is read, a piece of narration. It could be something that's new every time. Let's say if you're sitting down to speak with a guest and you can give some insight or backstory into who this person is and tell the audience, hey, why are they an important person to talk to at this time or about this topic? And then there are theme songs that you can get out there through services like Audio Jungle or Story Blocks, where you can get something that's royalty free. There are even ways to get that information or those songs like, you know, for free, or a small amount that you're paying for, or you can hire somebody to make something that's associated with your brand or your content so that it's not actually going to be utilized for anyone else, so that when they hear it, it's sort of reinforcing that, hey, we're here, we're listening to this thing together, right? You're getting associated with the host and the audience. And then starting that editing process, it really is just a, once you have some of those pieces, just refining the ways that you want the audience to hear your content.
Well, and Adam, do you know the price of or the cost of someone to edit an episode? Would it depend on how long the episode is, things like that, probably?
Yeah, it really depends on the type of content, right? So something like adding in, music and outros and editing down an episode might be kind of like just an hourly flat rate fee, right, for that individual. But then you might have something where, like, I have another client that I'm working with that is he's a radio reporter, and we're working with lots of different assets. So we have music, and we have multiple interviews that are being cut down, and we're sort of making editorial decisions, and sort of that is a larger, per hour or per contract price point. So depending on the size of your show and what that is, it's probably going to be kind of a flat rate price. For me, it has usually been somewhere in the anywhere from $25 to $50 per hour, depending on content. But it really does depend on how much equipment and time it takes, because it's going to take at least the same amount of time to listen to the episode to be able to edit it down if we are looking for some of those focal disfluencies or redundancies or anything like that.
And then Josh or Susie, did you have anything to add on this particular slide?
The editing process can be really interesting. And again, if you work with a professional, you learn about your vocal disfluencies. My personal favorite word is I like to say it over and over, especially when paying for editing. But you become very aware. So for example, Adam was able to show me visually on that thing that goes like this, that audio
waveforms. Yep.
Yes, thank you. So he was able to show me, okay, you did this with your microphone here, and this was the result, and you did it, and you clearly used it better here because you had a better result. And to be able to see those things and be able to look for them and monitor them myself has been really incredibly helpful.
Yeah, and what he spoke to about, Joe Rogan being an interview show and having very little editing, the other side of that is you can go listen to This American Life or anything from WNYC, and they've crafted these beautiful podcasts with, backgrounds and songs. And it's like, it's whatever story you want to tell. If you just want to have a one-on-one like Rogan does, or if you want to craft these beautiful masterpieces, it's endless. It's endless options.
Sorry, that was our slide there. So now posting and finishing touches. We're going to have Josh talk a little bit about this.
So we're in a great time when it comes to posting and publishing your podcast. Like, I think, 10 years ago, it was not easy to take an MP3 and put it on the internet, and then you'd have to host it this place, and then you have to build, whatever back end you're going to build. And now we've got so many great, products like an Anchor or a SoundCloud. And really the only result you need is to create that RSS feed that the podcatchers essentially are going to want. I do it kind of old school. Well, I have clients that I don't do it old school, but for me, I do it old school, where I still upload a file and I still create kind of I make my own RSS feed. Essentially, it's just how I do it. But with something like SoundCloud, you take your MP3, you write a quick description about it, you title it what you're going to title it, and it will generate its own RSS feed of those episodes. And what the RSS feed is, basically, it's kind of an arrow that points to new episodes when they come out. So instead of having to go to iTunes and Google Play and Spotify and all these individual places and say, here's my podcast, the RSS feed kind of tells them all when a new episode is posted. And depending on the service, a Spotify will have it immediately, and iTunes will have it usually within 30 minutes for some reason. But once you create that RSS feed, whether it's through a service like a SoundCloud, or you do it the old-fashioned way, it's just a link. So it's just going to be, RSS, whatever your feed is, looks like a URL essentially. And you will sign in to your creator dashboard, whether it's on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or Spotify. And this is the most heavy lifting you'll have to do, is you go in there, you basically register your podcast. You say, here's my RSS feed. It checks the RSS feed to make sure everything is good, to make sure your artwork is the correct size and dimension, make sure everything is checking out. You hit a submit, and then it's usually an approval process. Apple takes longer than like a Google or a Spotify, but once you've done that, from that point on, all you need to do is publish to your one main location. So I'll use SoundCloud again as an example. From now on, whenever you upload a podcast to SoundCloud, you type in your description, your title, your artwork. When you hit save, it then goes to all those places. So if you've got a user who is using Spotify podcasts, or if you've got a user who's using Apple Podcasts, they get the same product from the same source. So that's the heaviest part of getting published, really, is going to these, deciding where you want to be published. There's 100 places, but as for me, I use Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. There's a ton of other places you can be more advanced if you choose, but that's just basically what I use. And as far as the artwork goes, generally, going back to the images that they were showing in the beginning, a square image, I think the requirement now is like 1400 by 1400, or maybe 2000 by 2000 pixels or whatever. It's got to be a high res image. And then once you've got that, you host that wherever you create your podcast, and that's where your RSS feed seeks it. So like I said, the hardest part is going to be that 2 hours you've got to spend creating a Google Play account, an Apple podcast account, et cetera, et cetera. And then from that point on, you're golden.
Cool. Thanks, Josh. And I think I have a quick example of just artwork, a title and a description. So one of the tips I had was Canva. It's a really cool tool. It's free, and they actually have podcast templates for you guys for free. And, they keep it simple, and it's a pretty cool template to use. But basically, this is Cafe Kubal's podcast. Their description is very to the point. They have keywords in there like Syracuse, coffee, upstate New York. But it's basically all there is to it for that. All right, now the fun part of actually promoting your podcast and letting the world know what you're doing. So we're gonna have Josh and Susie talk a little bit about that. Starting with Josh.
So, website, social media, family, friends, you obviously go for the lowest hanging fruit, which is your family and your friends, and you tell them about your show and your podcast. And what I tend to do with a new episode, mine's kind of different because I do a show that's every day, so people kind of get in that habit, but it's always great to remind them. And when you are using, we'll use an example like Twitter. If you are going to tweet out about your podcast, I always say don't make them work too hard to find it. Meaning, if you're going to tweet, I have a new episode of my podcast up, don't just tweet, I have a new episode of my podcast up. Tweet, this week I talked to XYZ about this. You can hear it at these following locations, and put links to whatever, your Apple Podcasts, your Spotify, wherever those are. I use a service called Tiny URL, which you can shorten a bunch of links. so you don't have these big long links in your tweets that look weird. And when something like Twitter, post it a couple times a day, because once that's out of that feed, it kind of goes away. So I'll hand it over to Susie.
Those are all really great tips from Josh. Yeah, definitely. You want to be very intentional about your marketing with this, as with anything else. It's, again, very useful if it's tied into brand and business goals. This is just a possible scenario that I kind of drew up for you all. And it's important with any marketing strategy that there is a pre-launch, a launch, and a post. And that way you're able to kind of grasp the attention and then give them a purpose for their attention and then hold their attention. And so you want to be able to, one of the great opportunities that a podcast allows us is the ability to establish ourselves as an authority. You're broadcasting your knowledge, you're broadcasting your personal take on a topic. And that can be really very empowering for your brand. So you want to be able to share that kind of knowledge on your social media channels. You want to showcase your expertise, talk a little bit about your take on it, and if you have guests, definitely promote them and get your audience excited about who your guests are going to be. And then you want to go into exactly like Josh said, don't leave any mystery. You should have direct arrows pointing to where people can connect with your content and how and why to tune in. And then a great tip is to engage with other feeds that may have interest in your content. So it doesn't necessarily mean post your promotion on their feed, but maybe you can jump in on a conversation that connects to the knowledge that you're sharing on your podcast. These are all very brand positive efforts that, again, will pay off in ways other than are monetary, but they will pay off in ways of brand awareness and creating authority around your brand. You want to go on to create unique content for every platform. It's really the best way to grasp and hold attention throughout a marketing campaign. So if you can have a bit of a different take or a bit of a different image, different information on each platform that you're promoting on, that would work to your advantage. And then you want to continue the conversation on social. You want to look at any frequently asked questions that you have about it, or any questions that came up about the topic. And that's a great way to continue your conversation with your audience. Then you want to start to drop some knowledge about the next one that you'll be hosting and the next one that you'll be promoting. Not just promoting it, promoting the knowledge that you'll be talking about. And then you go back to the beginning and you start all over again.
Thanks. Adam, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think that Susie brings up a good point there about, continuing to just engage in conversations around the topics that you're discussing or bringing up, and sort of being an expert around that particular field definitely helps create engagement that's not necessarily strictly tied to just that one episode.
Great. All right, so here are some, again, missed that slide. Here are some local podcasts that some of us listen to. I think it's important to support local podcasts, and like Josh mentioned, and Susie and Adam, it's important to listen to them to know what you like, to know, what they're doing well. So you could probably do that in your podcast as well. So Susie's podcast is on here. Do you want to talk a little bit about your podcast, Susie?
Sure, thanks. So it's all about brand. It's all about brand and business strategy. It's trying to communicate how you should think about the way that you approach different things that you do with your brand and your business. I have an interesting take on things, I think, in that I combine the mindsets that you need to be able to accomplish your business goals so that you can then accomplish your brand goals. And linking all of those things together is how I kind of create my narrative and conduct my interviews. Thank you.
And then Josh, I forget, which podcast are you doing these days?
So
or do you enjoy listening
to? I post my daily morning show as a podcast. I do, we haven't done it this past month because the restaurants have been closed, but we do something called Sunday Brunch, where we go out and I use that portable recorder to eat at restaurants around CNY. So those are my two main podcasts, are my daily show and my Sunday afternoon show.
Nice. And then Adam, I know you have a couple podcasts going right now, right?
Yeah, the main one that's sort of a local production is Windfall. It's sort of like if you had an HBO show for your ears. So it's kind of like a Game of Thrones or Westworld or something of that nature, a sort of science fiction dystopian story with a large cast that we had primarily performers from the greater Syracuse area, along with some actors that we had from New York come up. We recorded it all right here in Syracuse, and actually ended up, I relocated up here from New York to come up here to kind of finish up production on this particular show. It's a 10-episode series, large cast, and has a whole lot of sound design and music and all of that around there. So it was a great sort of local endeavor that we had, that we've built up. We have listeners all over the world now, which is amazing. And we're supposed to be going into production later on this year, but being able to get a whole bunch of people together to record something is not something that we can do at this particular moment. So we're even trying to reassess the way that we produce our show going forward.
Oh, that's great. All right, well, that concludes our panel discussion, but we want to open it up to Q&A right now. I have some questions already on the funnel, but again, use the chat feature and feel free to reach out to Josh, Susie, or Adam. And then at the end of this, we'll send the recording and PowerPoint slides to you all, as well as Susie's templates that are amazing to start your goals and genres and things like that. So let's see here. I guess this question was for anyone, but Josh, I know you talked about it. When uploading to various locations through SoundCloud, why would you not try to list on all possible outlets?
You absolutely can. You can spend as much time as you want finding every outlet possible. I just kind of focus on the most popular ones. A lot of people, the people who are more tech savvy, can always take a direct RSS feed. Your RSS feed is public. And if they use their own kind of, podcatcher app, they can just insert it in there and manually get your feed. But I was just focusing on the 4 or 5 most popular.
Right. Cool. And then I think this is a question for anyone, but the legalities about doing podcasts, is it the same as traditional radio, TV, as far as the licenses to play music, using people's remarks, things like that? Anyone can kind of take that one, or?
Yeah, all of those things do still apply. There's maybe, because there are so many and they're easy to distribute, you may not be caught right away. And I'm sure that there's stuff out there that is, currently utilizing maybe music that hasn't been licensed or things like that. But you can get a cease and desist if you don't have the rights to those things. It is something where, fair use is still in play as well. So you can't just, take a segment from a show and play an entire thing or segment of that. You have to sort of be commenting or reporting on it in some way for it to be considered within fair use.
Cool. Josh, Susie, anything to add to that, or?
Just that anytime you're referencing somebody else's thoughts or ideas or words, you should absolutely credit them and give a way to connect or find and verify that information. It's just good reporting, I guess. Good practice.
And like Adam said, if it is fair use, if you're commenting on, oh, here's the new, Ariana Grande song, and you do a clip to comment on it, that's great. But don't think you can just do an hour-long music show without having the rights to that music. You'll get flagged pretty quick if you're just playing entire cuts by artists or whatever. I mean, and we do a show on the radio, so there's songs on it, and every day we go through and cut out songs and commercials, so we don't get hit with that. We do have rights to rebroadcast it in some ways, but it's nothing that you guys would need to concern yourself with when it comes to podcasts. Just be safe. Take any music out that you don't own the rights to unless you're doing fair use.
And then I had a question. If a local artist covers a song, that's still a copyright royalty risk, correct?
Correct.
Correct, okay.
Yeah, it's something where there's kind of two different components of there's the songwriting license, right? Or the whoever, composed the original song, and then who performed it, right? And so if you get the access for the person who performed it, but they didn't write that song, then you still don't have access to that song.
Got it. And another big question, and this is something I know I'm curious about too, is how do you monetize your podcast?
So there's kind of two schools of thought when it comes to monetization. I went this past July there's this big national podcast conference, and like the numbers are always like, you need to have 10,000 downloads of an episode to get into that network, that funnel essentially of like the big corporates, like the Casper mattresses and the stamps.com. They're not gonna even look at your podcast till you're getting 10,000 plus an episode. So if you want to go that way, obviously you need to have a very successful podcast and then get into some kind of ad network. The other way is we do a lot with ours is just local ad sales. If you are a podcaster and you work really hard at your product and you're really proud of it, don't be afraid to ask your buddy who owns a pizza place, hey man, I would love to feature you on my podcast. Could you throw me $50, $100? And you build that kind of as a local sales model. And that's another way to monetize. And then you don't even got to worry about the ad networks.
That's a great tip, Josh, to hit up some local retailers if you're a local podcast, for sure. It is important, like I said earlier, it is a long-term ROI for the most part to get to that 10,000 mark, to be able to have the data to substantiate people's marketing dollars in your pocket, right? So I think it is important to have other brand and business goals tied to your podcast while you're working towards that 10,000 downloads, or while you're working towards giving even local brands a reason to hand over their marketing dollars to you. So you're going to want to look at things like brand awareness. You're going to want to look at things like where you're creating knowledge, the types of people that you're getting to connect with, and the types of people that you're getting to hear your message. So those things, not monetary ROI, but all important to keep you going in the meantime.
Yeah, and I think that there's a variety of other ways that people are starting to monetize things as well. A lot of personalities may be using services to incentivize donations from their audience. And even public radio uses this model and has for a long time, right? Where it's listeners like you donate. But now there are platforms out there where sort of people can build these things on a smaller scale, where you don't need an entire staff of people, who can handle those finances. There are services like Patreon that people are utilizing now to garner monthly donations or weekly donations or per piece of content donations. Directly from their audience. And then once people do get onto a larger scale, and even people who have built up an audience who is loyally, donating, you can take that information and bring it to advertisers and brands as well to be able to, solicit some of the advertising like Josh was mentioning. And one other piece that I'll tell you about is there's services out there that once you do get into sort of those larger download numbers, there's even programmatic advertising for podcasts now, where if you are getting certain ads, what can happen is that advertisers who are using larger getting larger numbers, but maybe have leftover ad inventory that hasn't been delivered through their normal podcasts, it can actually be dynamically added into your podcast. Now, the potential downside for something like that, it's not you necessarily who is promoting that, right? It may not be as valuable to the brand at the end of it, but it's a way to be able to bring in revenue as you're getting to those, higher and higher download numbers.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. And then another question. I know it's important as you're doing your podcast and have episodes, do you have 10 listeners? Do you have 1,000 listeners? So what kind of analytics tools are out there to really focus your attention on the data and analytics of your podcast? And how do you know what to look for? What's good? What's bad? Can kind of start there.
I know that it's kind of a changing of the guard right now because Apple kind of keeps it quiet on how many people download, but I use kind of I use a program called Blueberry, which is not spelled like blueberry, so don't spell it like that, but it's like BLU berry, and it tracks every time someone downloads an episode. So I have a number of how many people have downloaded each episode. The problem with that is, did they automatically download it? I don't know. Did they listen to 10 minutes of it? I don't know. So we are now in a time where those analytics are going to get more dialed in. I think right now the only analytics I really see are downloads, and I don't know if it automatically went on their phone. I don't know anything. So I know that Apple, and maybe Susie and Adam know more than I do as far as that goes, but I know that Apple is trying to give more analytics like that, like they listened for 6 minutes or whatever it is.
Yeah, I can speak to this a little bit. There are some of those services like Blueberry or different podcast hosting companies, right, are now kind of aggregating all of the analytic data from different sources. So Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Radio Public or any of these various platforms that are these podcatchers, people call them. And those companies are starting to report back more and more information. And there's now even sort of a compliancy that advertisers are asking for in some way, where there's something called Iab Compliance. And what that does is it gives you some information about if that was downloaded to and listened to, right? Even if it is 5 minutes of it, right? But it gives us some more information about if this is like a legitimate sale for the advertiser. So it's in some ways, it's better for brands right now than, but it's because for a long time, none of that information was available. And it was just like, well, here's a big number of downloads, and you may not have actionable information about who listened to it and when, and demographic information. But now, because everyone's listening with their smartphones or computers, there's actually a lot of even demographic information that's tied with this. So, through Simplecast as one of the platforms that I use, I can actually go in and see, okay, how many people of this age are able to, or are listening in this country.
Got it. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, really great points. There is limited data available now, but it's a good practice to get engaged with whatever data there is available for you to observe and kind of inventory, and then act on as you are best off. Simplecast does offer a decent amount of data. Of course, there's more data if you want to pay for it, but it basically, even though it is limited, get into the habit of being engaged with it and just observing it and see where it takes your narrative. Some things just may perform better than others. Some people that you interview may perform better than others, and really see what your audience is responding to in that way.
Yeah, great points. Great. And I know Josh has to sneak out of here in a couple minutes, so I just kind of wanted to conclude with, if you could give us maybe one last tip for starting a podcast, and then give us maybe your favorite podcast that you enjoy listening to kind of end it all.
I think my tip is what I said at the beginning, is just practice it. You're not live on TV or radio or anything. Just sit down and practice it, and then analyze what you've done and what you liked about it and what don't you like about it. And if it's not something that you would listen to, then it's probably not ready yet. So make sure that when you listen back to it, you are actually entertained and engaged and interested in the topic. If you find yourself zoning out, then your listeners will zone out. And my favorite podcast, I listen to like 4 podcasts a day. like you guys said, I'll listen on the way to work, and then I listen on the way home from work, and then I have wireless headphones that I go around the house and I'll listen to. Rogan is one of my favorites. I love his interview style, but there's a really, if you're an internet nerd like I am, the New York Times has the Daily that I love, but they just released something called Rabbit Hole, which is all about like just how the internet is shaping our brains and making us do things. And they follow these storylines. It's really beautifully done, and I really love it. And I think that that's probably my favorite podcast right now.
Cool. Thanks, Josh.
Yeah.
It's
I'm
fascinating.
gonna jump out. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Josh.
Bye, Josh.
Adam, do you want to go next?
Oh, I was just going to say, I was going to echo Josh's sentiment there that Rabbit Hole sounds incredible. It's the reporting on it is amazing. There's great music production around it. And the two versions two shows that he brought up kind of illustrate a lot of what you can get between going from, just a interview chat style show to something that's highly produced like that. I would say The Daily is definitely one of my favorite, or Radiolab is a favorite of mine as well. And I will jump off of one thing that Josh said before, that not only like test listening by yourself, but share it with people who are close to you, who might be within your audience, right? Get their honest feedback about the way that it sounds so far. Are they interested? And don't settle for that, like, sure, yeah, I loved it. Ask for actionable feedback based on, how they actually felt around listening to it prior to putting content out.
I agree with both of them. I think it's incredibly important to be very intentional and very strategic about your podcast, because, as I said, it is quite an investment of time, talent, and treasure. So with all of those things considered, you want to really make sure that you know what you're doing going in. Consult a pro if you can. It's really worth an investment in a half an hour conversation to have a really firm way to know that you know what you're doing technically going in is very helpful. And as far as my favorite podcast, Oprah Super Soul Sunday is just, that's my every Sunday. And How I Built This, I like by Guy Raz. It's an NPR one that I enjoy a lot. I just love hearing startup stories, and it's motivational and inspirational, and and gives you a lot of good information in that way. And the Wall Street Journal's news broadcast I like very much as well. It's sort of a different, more modern take on journalism, which I enjoy very much.
Great. Yeah, we love Guy Raz. He's a good one. I had one more question. Do you guys have any interviewing tips? Not all podcasts are an interview format, but if you guys have any advice for just interviewing tips, keeping the conversation going, things like that.
Sure. You want to go in with an outline. You want to go in well-researched and with good notes prepared. You want to prepare your guest with the questions beforehand. It can feel spontaneous and fun to not have the questions beforehand, but if you want to keep a really well-structured and intentional conversation, it is to your benefit to at least give them a good framework around the conversation. And that's why it's very beneficial to start with an outline, to understand the goals and intentions, and to choose that main thread that you're going to pull tightly throughout the conversation. And have questions and have extra questions, because a lot of times if you've chosen your guests well, they'll probably answer a lot of your questions in their content anyway. So have questions and have extra questions. That would be my recommendation.
I would say just make sure you're genuinely curious about this person as well, right? And an outline or pre-interviews, all of that can certainly help you, but also don't be blind or have the blinders on for only your outline. If somebody is going down an interesting path, like ask them about it, find out more about it. If there's something where it's like, oh man, I wish we talked more about that, right? Do that. Don't be incredibly beholden to this one thing unless there is a specific goal or brand, goal that is associated with speaking to this individual about that particular subject.
All right, thank you. And then last question here about guests. It says, are they paid? Are they affiliate marketing? How does that work if they have an audience and you don't? I'm guessing that's, if you want to have a guest on your show, it could be wrong though.
Yeah, I have not worked on any shows where guests are paid. It's something where you're working with people to like help either market something or tell a story or things like that. Most of the things that I've worked in have been semi-journalism focused, so it has not. There's an ethical question there if you're paying somebody to respond to something, right? They're now being paid to respond in that way. So it's usually better that if you can get guests who are going to just be there to have the conversation with you to either help, expand their own marketing or just genuinely want to tell their story. That's probably the best way to go about it.
Agree. Susie, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm interpreting that question as if you have somebody that you would kind of aspire to interview, if there's like the top expert in your field that you want to get on your show, or somebody who has a large following to increase your following, if that's kind of what they're thinking with that question. It goes back to using your social channels and your own marketing to establish yourself as an authority and attract their attention. Give me a reason to want to connect with you. And you do that by sharing your knowledge throughout all of your content.
Perfect. All right, so I think that kind of concludes our show here. Certainly, if you guys have questions, we'll send the PowerPoint, the speaker emails, and Susie's template. But definitely keep an eye on what CenterState has to offer for events in the coming weeks. And yeah, thanks for joining us, Susie and Adam. I learned a lot, so thank you.
Great, thank you. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.